All right, I'm going to talk to you about operant conditioning. Another name for operant conditioning is instrumental conditioning. We talked about classical conditioning first with Pavlov, and now we're going to move into a different type of learning, which is called operant conditioning. The idea behind operant conditioning is something that you probably already understand and know implicitly, maybe not explicitly. So we're going to go through the explicit ways that it was sort of fleshed out with animal models and even in humans. Thorndike is credited with what's called the law of effect, which in a nutshell says that animals will continue to do things that they find beneficial or rewarding to them in a biological sense, and they will stop doing things that they find not to be rewarding to them in a biological sense. So if you keep going to the same place and you keep finding safety and food and opportunities for mating, then animals will keep going to that place. If, however, you go to a place and it's dangerous, there's no food and no mates, you're not going to go to that place. So this is an applied form of learning in an ecological sense. Thorndike was really smart and genius who understood animal learning implicitly, but then began to experiment with it. And he put cats in a box, which is a dangerous thing. Do not put a cat in a box, they will probably scratch you. But in this box, there was a unique lever, and that lever, if the cat walked on the lever and pushed that lever down, it would release the cat. Cats don't like to be confined, so they want to get out of the box. They have a motivation, an incentive. They feel punished being in the box, and there's release from that punishment when they do what's called an escape behavior. So Thorndike puts cats in a box, and the cat spends a bunch of time in that box, walking around, meowing, trying to get out, clawing at stuff. Eventually, at some point, it's going to hit that lever. Now, when it hits that lever, it doesn't know that that lever caused the gate to be open, but it had that experience. So next time you put the cat in the box, it spends less time walking around where the lever isn't. It spends more time walking around where the lever is, which inevitably means that it's going to spend less time in that box. Again, it is avoiding, it's getting rewarded by this escape behavior by spending time where that escape behavior happened. If you think of escape rooms for humans, it's kind of a similar thing. If you've done one, you kind of figure out things about what to spend your time doing the next time you're in that situation. J.B. Watson also was another famous early learning theorist or behaviorist. He, however, wasn't so nice just to mess with cats. He took one of the secretary in the psychology department's kid. His name was Albert. We know him henceforth as Little Albert. And this kid was like 9 months old, 10 months old. You know, he could sit up, but he couldn't walk around or whatever. And he gave this little kid a white rat. And kids love rats. They're fun. And rats are fine enough to pet with if they've been domesticated. You know, maybe Skinner got them in the lab where they were doing experiments on rats. But he gave this kid the rat, and as soon as he gave him the rat, they smashed this big, loud, clanging sound right behind the kid's head, which causes a reflexive startle response, right? You can't stop but being startled by that, and this kid was clearly startled. So this kid inevitably, little Albert, inevitably starts crying. Well, they do this a bunch of times, and then what ends up happening is they go to present him that rat, and what does little Albert do? He's freaked out by it. He has generalized that this white rat has sort of become this dangerous thing, whereas it really wasn't for him. It was just a plaything. He generalized that white rat as being dangerous to other little white things, including even this Santa mask, a beard, a white beard. He may have just been generally scared. I'm not sure Watson's methodology was quite on par as he was doing things that were unethical. Then we get to the most famous of all the behaviorists, which is B.F. Skinner. Now, B.F. Skinner, he is famous for saying that give me any child born from any race of any nation and give me the resources needed and I could turn him into a plumber, a lawyer, a doctor, a common petty thief, the president. He basically said all learning comes from experience. That's what the behaviorist's general idea is. And nothing is innate. So he had nothing that came innately, like say later the Howard Gardners, as we talked about with that multiple intelligences. He said nothing's innate, it's all learned. He employed the idea of Locke's tabula rasa, which is the Latin words that means blank slate, that when you're born you're a blank slate, anything could be written upon it. and that writing is through experience. He basically found that you could teach animals to do things by rewarding them. Now, animals like basically three things, unless it's a domesticated dog. Domesticated dogs can be rewarded through praise from humans, or connectivity, socialization, touch with humans. If you pet a rat, it's not going to jump through hoops for you. You have to feed it, give it opportunities for mate, or give it safety. So he basically starved a bunch of these rats and these pigeons. He worked with pigeons a lot. And then he would teach them to peck certain things. He even got them to play a form of table tennis. Pigeons would stand on either side of a table and hit the ping pong ball back and forth. And he trained them up to do that through something called successive approximations. Obviously, pigeons don't play table tennis. But if you reward them for going and pecking at that ping pong ball in their cage, well, then they'll keep pecking at that ping pong ball. And then you can do the next step, which is to have them peck it in a certain place, and they will eventually get rewarded for that. So they'll keep doing that to get the rewards. He had to starve them, though. If you want to use food rewards, you have to basically make them work for their food. And so that's one of the lesser known tricks of, say, animal training, is that you need to make sure that the animal has a motivation for that reward. B.F. Skinner was so successful at training animals that the U.S. government hired him to literally teach pigeons to fly bombs into Japanese warships in the Pacific. So the Japanese employed kamikazes, which was a pilot flying a plane filled with bombs into the U.S. and the Allied forces. We didn't want to do that, so they hired B.F. Skinner to say, hey, you train these pigeons, we'll let the pigeon fly this. Actually, it was a glider. They had these sort of big bombs with wings that they could release from a plane up in the sky, and it would sort of glide down towards the target. Well, they didn't have guidance systems, they didn't have radar, they didn't have, like now we have these laser guided bombs and cruise missiles that you can shoot from wherever. They didn't have that. So he trained these pigeons to target the ships, and he rewarded them, got them trained up, and they were ready to go. They didn't deploy them. They would have been capable of doing this, but they didn't deploy them in the war theater, mostly because we got radar on board, which saved lots of pigeons and hopefully human lives. But that was B.F. Skinner. He was an ardent behaviorist. He believed that only people learn through experience. They do not learn, they don't come with innate proclivities towards learning in certain things. All right, let's talk about behaviorists and what they say, how people learn operant conditioning. If you want a target behavior to increase, you must reward it. Now, there's two types of rewards: positive and negative rewards. Positive doesn't mean good, negative doesn't mean bad. Positive means that you give something to the animal, the organism, the child, the adult, that they don't have. That's positive. That's applying something that's not there. Negative means you take something away from them that they have or that's available to them. Reward means that you're trying to get the target behavior to increase. In the video that I'll have you guys watch, there's an example of this where a mother gives her daughter candy reward for doing a target behavior, cleaning up a room. And if you want to increase the target behavior, cleaning up the room, you positively, that is, you give something, you add something to the scenario of the child to reward them for that target behavior. So you have to wait around until they clean it up. But once they do, you give them a reward that's so high value to that child that that's going to make them want to do that subsequently. There's also another form of operant conditioning that works on a reinforcement schedule, which is punishment. Now, punishment is, again, something that can have positive punishment or negative punishment. Positive doesn't mean good, negative doesn't mean bad. Positive means you apply something to the animal, organism, or child, or adult that they don't have. Negative means you take something away that they do have. And punishment means that you're trying to get that target behavior to go down. Think of a classic scheme of you want your child to stop saying a bad word. And let's say they say a bad word, you say, every time you say a bad word, I'm going to take $1 out of your allowance. That's negative. Take something away that they get. And how they avoid that punishment is that they don't say those bad words. That's negative punishment. If you slap your child when they say, damn it, then that would be positive punishment. Positive doesn't mean good. You probably shouldn't hit your kid. But positive means that you've applied something as punishment that they don't like. So positive punishment is applying something that they don't like to get them to stop doing that target behavior. Negative is to take something away that they have. Let's say my boys are inside playing video games and I hear them arguing. I can say, stop arguing, or I will take away video games. Now, if I take away video games, that's punishment because it's taking away something that they have right now that they want to keep, but that if I take it away, I can get that target behavior of fighting with each other to go down. Now, there's definitely a way to reinforce things, and we've learned about what people do best through what types of reinforcement. If you reinforce things every single time, if every time my child does something that I want it to do, I give it a candy bar, as you'll see in the video, eventually they'll stop doing those things. Whereas if I start rewarding them on a fixed interval, I say, if you clean your room, do what I want you to do, target behavior, every Friday I'll give you allowance. That's a fixed interval, that every Friday, a length of time. They could clean the room every day, or they could just have it cleaned on Friday, and that they're going to meet that criteria of having it cleaned. That's a fixed interval schedule, and it works okay. I mean, if you think about it, that's what I get reinforced on, right? If I do my job, if I teach you, every month I get a check. I get money, a reward for doing that. That makes sense to reinforce things on a fixed interval scenario, but it isn't the best way to get animals or organisms, children or adults to do target behaviors more and more and more and more and more. In fact, what you want to do is not reinforce on a fixed interval ratio. You want to reinforce it by having a variable reinforcement. A variable reinforcement means that you're not going to be able to know when that reinforcement's coming. And you want to do it on a ratio. You don't want to have it be like a fixed ratio where it's like every time they do it, they get a reward, or every 5 times they do it, they get a reward. Because what ends up happening is they'll get satiated through the reward becomes less valuable the more of it they get. Whereas if they don't know when they're going to get it, but they do, and they're a little bit confused about how many times they have to do the target behavior to get the reward, that's a variable ratio schedule, and you can elicit incredible behaviors from people, from creatures, to do things again and again and again if you confuse them a little bit about when they're going to get rewarded. And what I'm saying is basically you say, let's reinforce on average every 5th successful target behavior. That is, they don't know if they're going to get rewarded on the 5th completion. Maybe they get rewarded on the 2nd, and then it takes them 8 more completions to get rewarded again. But again, 2 and 8 divided by 10 or divided by 2 is 5, so it on averages every 5, even though they got rewarded after the 2nd behavior once and then after the 8th behavior the 2nd time. That's the best way to get an organism to do behaviors again and again and again and again and again and again. They won't be distracted by it. So variable ratio is the best way to do it. Fixed interval, like salary, is an okay way for people to be reinforced, but it's not going to elicit the most responses of that target behavior. And finally, variable intervals. So you might say, first I'm going to do 40 seconds. Every 40 seconds, if you do the right thing, I'm going to give this animal a treat. And then you'll move it to every 45 seconds. And then you'll move it to every 40 seconds. And then you'll move it to every 40 seconds. And then every 45 seconds. And you'll vary the interval that they get reinforced. That's a pretty good one because you're confusing them with how long it's going to be before they get reinforced, but it's not necessarily something that they can't figure out. The variable ratio is best because it keeps them confused about when they're going to receive that desired reinforcement. I think that's all I'm going to tell you about operant conditioning. So please read the chapter on learning, including classical or Pavlovian and operant or instrumental. Sorry that they have 2 names. That's just, people want to name things different stuff and we don't have uniformity. But yeah, look into this and you'll see that it's really an impressive uncovering of the way that animals learn to behave. It applies in all scenarios. If you go out and you look in the woods, you'll find bears that are, targeting campgrounds to tear open all the food at the campground because they have been rewarded at some point, and then they've been stopped at some point, and then they'll be rewarded again at some point. So that variable ratio of reinforcement keeps the bears going back there. And that's why, park rangers, if you go camping up in the national parks or here in the state parks, you'll find that they're very militant about not allowing that bear to get that reward and keeping all of your food in a bear box, because if they get rewarded for something, it becomes a very enticing place for them to return to. And thereby they get a lot more destructive property and might have to be tranked and moved out of the area. It's very resource intensive. So this can be applied in that situation. It can be applied in a situation where you want to change your child's behavior. It could be applied in a situation where you want to change your own behavior. Don't think you aren't good enough or worthy enough to even set up a reward schedule for yourself. For example, I have to do these videos, but it's tedious, it's work, and I could reward myself by saying I'm going to listen to a podcast every time I complete one of these videos, or I'm going to go play with my kids, or I'm going to go do something else that I enjoy. If I plan out that sequence of rewards, it can entice me towards this good behavior, which is to complete my work. You can apply these principles to yourself, and it will be helpful in your life.